Hello, welcome back to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay. Amanda is on vacation still. She'll be back next episode. And with us again is Wes from the Pensky File. How you doing, Wes?
Good. I've returned. We're back. It's only been a couple of weeks in terms of podcasts, but it feels like it's been a very, very long time. We talked about, what did we talk about? Nightmare on Elm Street
3.
Trois. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's been weird. The two universes of the listener universe versus the recording universe have veered far away from each other the past couple months.
Yeah, our political commentary is no longer timely or sensible. We're talking
I still think
George
McGovern's
H.W. Bush.
I still think McGovern's going to pull it out. Is what all I'm saying.
I think Dukakis stands a pretty solid chance. So we'll see.
Can't believe I'm losing to this guy. But we are here to talk about a film that I think we might be able to talk about the entire show based on just whether or not it belongs on this list.
Yeah, you mean as a technicality, not whether it's quality aside.
Right, yes, just technicality. Yeah. We're doing One Cut of the Dead from 2017. It is number 8 on this list.
Oh, wow.
Number 8. It has a 100% Rotten Tomatoes score. It is one of only two 100% movies on the list. The other is a movie called His House from 2020, which I have never heard of. It seems to be a Netflix
How many
movie.
reviews? This has like 100 reviews to get to 100%, which is impressive.
His House has 125.
Okay, even more impressive.
And
our house, my house,
yes, very,
not his house
anymore, very fine house.
Yeah.
With an 86% audience score. I'm a little surprised the audience score is that low on this, but I think there's...
Oh, really? I thought this was a kind of a textbook example of, I thought that the audience score was going to be 50% and the critic score would be 100%.
Oh, really?
I thought it was one of those movies.
Yeah, it's from what I've seen, the reviews on like IMDb and stuff are either this is the greatest movie ever made or this was the biggest waste of time I've ever experienced in my life. So,
yeah.
But we'll get into all that stuff. Had you seen this before?
No, I'd never even heard of it. For context, I knew nothing about it going in. I actually knew one thing, which led to me to be somewhat confused, which is that when I was looking it up to see, like, when you told me the title of the movie and I looked it up to see what I needed to look for on like Amazon or something, one of the reviews or one of the log lines said it said something along the lines of like a 35-minute adventure in hell or something like that. And I was like, oh, wow, it's a weird half-hour movie. It's short. And so when the movie booted up, I was like, why is this movie an hour and a half? and then I quickly, after the first half hour passed, I was quickly going like, what the hell is going on? Like, is this the right movie? Am I watching the right thing? And then eventually I caught on. But I went in with the false pretenses of thinking it was going to be a half hour long, and it went for much longer than that. Yeah,
this was one I knew of this, but I had never seen it. But it was one that people had always said to me is like, oh, that's a really good one. You got to see that one. And I think I just avoided it because I didn't know anything about it. And so I just assumed when you see the poster, which is a guy holding a camera and people in zombie makeup and stuff, my first instinct was, okay, it's like a found footage thing. I'm sure it's fine. But I had no idea of what it actually consisted of. And
are you looking at the Japanese theatrical poster, like the yellow background?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because I get strong comedy vibes from it. Like it definitely doesn't look like a super scary poster. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. But I think I was just predisposed to kind of write it off because one of the things I want to talk about is I think this is a movie you can only really get away with once you've completely exhausted a genre.
Yeah.
But we'll get into all that. But I hadn't seen it. I had been meaning to see it. They had done it on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, which is a show that I love, but I missed that episode. And so I was it was a good excuse for me to circle back and watch that as well.
Only came out in 2017. It's not super old at this point. I mean, it's I guess it's it's 8 years or something like that. But it's
God, that was 8 years ago. Jesus.
I had never we're farther from this movie than we are from the pandemic, or some sort of metaphor that you could say. It's I'd never heard of it. I mean, I guess I've seen Parasite, so I've seen my one Asian movie of the past decade that I felt I needed to see.
the one you're obligated to watch.
This one must have just snuck in as an also ran in that category.
And it threw me off because it's Japanese. Because I don't usually think of Japan when I think of zombie movies. And so
Korea is getting all the buzz now.
Right.
So it's Korea. Yeah.
Right. So it was interesting to see their take on that as well. But we will play the trailer for you, take a quick break, and then we'll get into it.
ここね。表向きは浄水場として作られたんだけど、裏ではある実験に使ってたんだって。
ある実験？
人体実験。
撮影は続ける。カメラは止めない。
あの噂が本当だったなんて。最高かよおい。
血はもう巻き終わった。
死の呪文を唱えるとそれはよみがえる。それ？
はいカット。ゾンビもので生中継でワンカットやっていただけますか。
Okay, One Cut of the Dead. Alternate title, I believe, is Don't Stop Shooting.
Yes. Or don't, what does it say? It says don't stop the camera.
Don't stop the camera.
The literal meaning in Japanese.
Yeah. I'm going to apologize to the nation of Japan before I read all these names. Directed by Shinichiro Ueda, written by Shinichiro Ueda and Ryoichi Wada, who is the writer of a play called Ghost in the Box, and was awarded credit after there was a plagiarism claim, which was apparently it's a much friendlier thing in Japan than here, because as Joe Bob pointed out, if this guy had claimed this in America, the studio would have buried him in lawsuits until he died. But in Japan, the director said, "Yeah, we didn't mean to rip it off, but it was an inspiration, so we'll put your name in the credits and we'll give you credit." And that was that.
Yeah, I thought my understanding was the director of this one mentioned in an interview that he had seen that play before. And so the playwright said, like, your movie is an awful lot like my play. And they said, well, do you want a writing credit? And he said, okay, sure.
Yeah.
That's
it's not that hard. Just be nice to people.
Japan never gets in big fights.
just that one time.
Just that one time. We showed them.
Starring Takayuki Himatsu, Yuzuki Akiyama, Harumo Shuhama. I apologize.
Yeah, the we've talked about it before, but the emphasis in Japanese names is all over the place. Yeah.
Kazuaki Nagaya. I'm impressed that I put this many in here to force myself to make it through all these. Minabu Hiroshi Ichihara and Mao.
Yep.
End on the easy one.
Not a single Daisuke, which
that one I could do.
You know,
Akira, Daisuke, those are the easy ones. You learn those in Boston when you have the one Japanese guy who lives in Boston.
Sohani now, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So as far as the synopsis for this, it kind of goes to show you how confusing this can be, because the IMDb synopsis is: things go badly for a hack director and film crew shooting a low-budget zombie movie in an abandoned World War II Japanese facility when they are attacked by real zombies, which tells me the person who wrote that did not watch the whole movie.
Yeah, they only saw the 35-minute teaser.
Yeah. Wikipedia says One Cut of the Dead, or Don't Stop the Camera, is a 2017 Japanese zombie comedy film written and directed by Shred. It follows a team of actors, filmmakers who are tasked with shooting a zombie film for live television and who must do so in a single take. Put those two things together, and then you get what this movie actually is.
The full log line. Yeah.
Where's my thing here? Some things you'll find in this movie are quote unquote The Net, which was a lot of references to The Net, which felt a little dated in 2017.
Not the Sandra Bullock movie.
No, unfortunately, no.
They were trying to get Sandra in this one, but she turned. The budget was only $25,000. They couldn't afford her.
Yes.
Apparently.
The POM, or I should say POM, slide self-defense technique, which I have been doing all day, much to the chagrin of my girlfriend.
Yeah. You need strong knees. It's not something you can.
You do. It's like
if you get a tendonitis, it's no good.
It's like a Mary Catherine Gallagher superstar motion.
Yes.
You got to get a deep squat in there.
That is what it is. Yeah, that is. Yeah. Molly Shannon should have been in this movie too.
That might have been my favorite part, is when they have that one bit at the beginning where the camera is just focused on the girl, but you can hear the commotion behind, and all you just hear is pum, 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 pum. You'll also find literal shitty makeup, which was my other favorite scene in the movie, where they're putting makeup on the guy who's shitting in the bushes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, there you go. Yep.
Fake puke, i.e. real puke.
Yep.
Extreme method acting, and a film inside a film inside a film. So, little background on this is this was the final project of a directing and acting class. Mm-hmm. And everyone who was in it pretty much had to pay to be in it because it was part of a class they were taking. And it cost $25,000, and I believe the gross on this movie was something like $25 million.
Yeah.
So it's got to be one of the most successful independent films of all time, or something.
Yeah,
like
it claims here it made box office history by earning over 1,000 times its budget. So it might be the highest ROI film that's ever been made. Yeah.
That's crazy. And it was one of those movies where it was shown at like a couple theaters or like in a film festival somewhere, and then someone who has a little bit of pull saw it and put it in more theaters, and it just kind of like got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Because it is a extremely unique movie, and I do think it is the kind of movie you can only do once you've exhausted a genre. But before we get too into it, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, my first takeaway, well, so I'm of two minds for this one. So on one hand, I was saying this isn't a horror movie. It doesn't deserve to be on the list at all.
Right.
On the other hand, I was saying, well, in a way, like probably about 87% of horror movies, all this really amounts to is the last 20 minutes. So maybe it is a horror movie in that sense. I thought it was like a roller coaster of a ride for me because, as I said, I didn't know what I was supposed to expect. And when the first act ends, so to explain it, like the first act is the movie that they shoot. The second act is kind of a prequel leading up to shooting that movie. So it kind of like flashes back in time. And then the third act is you watching the movie that you saw in the first act get made in real time, done cinematically. Yep. And so the roller coaster ride for me was that I was watching the movie with the expectation that this was a 35-minute movie. And after it started to pass that, and I realized that, no, this movie must go on for another hour after this, the novelty of I have a lot to talk about to open it, but I'm kind of a sucker for one-shot movies in the same way I'm a sucker for one-room movies. Like, I like the concept a lot, even if I don't think I've ever seen a great movie in either genre of those two. Sure. But I like them enough to watch even mediocre versions. So the single take thing was carrying me for about 15, 20 minutes to start it off, right? And then once all the main characters in the movie started dying, I was like, how the fuck are they going to keep going for another hour after this ends? Like, I have no idea where this is going to go. And then that movie ends, and you move into the second act, which is the flashback. And I hate the flashback section of this movie. Yeah. I hate the second act of this, mostly because it is purely necessary to get the movie to feature length and to sort of connect the two parts that actually matter of the movie in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then it got into the third act, And for the first 15 minutes of the third act, I was having a really great time going like, oh, this is definitely worth it. Like, this is all worth it for this payoff right here. This is what I've been waiting for. But then even then, I started to run out of gas a little bit like halfway through the third act of it, where I started getting tired of the reveals that they were showing me.
Yeah.
So I ended up, I like it. I think it's a good movie, but it's one of those kinds of movies that I'll say it's a good movie and I'll tell people about it and I will never ever watch it again.
Yeah. Yes.
You know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found it to be, I think it's really rare these days when you can get a movie that does legitimately put you in a position where you don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
And in a way where it's not, as you learn from the negative reviews of it, sometimes people don't like that. They want to know where every twist and turn is going to come from, and they don't like structural playing around with structure and stuff. But this is one where it's, if you are willing to get on the ride, you really, like, even once you get into that middle part, you don't totally exactly know how this is going to go until they start getting into the finale. And it's really interesting because it's three very distinct parts that by themselves aren't really that interesting, but together I think are excellent. Because, I would agree that the middle part is the weakest part, but the end doesn't work without it, and it makes the beginning more valuable if you go back and you watch the beginning again, because you know who these people are and you have a bit of, the connection is a bit clearer on the second watch if you do watch it again. But it really is only there to set up all the gags they're going to do at the end.
Yes. It does. It does. It's sort of the middle act sort of fakes character development when it's sort of pretending that it's developing characters, but what it's doing is setting up the gags for like what these characters are going to do at the end of the movie. And I think it's unnecessary. And a lot of this might be, I was wondering how much of it is a lost in translation issue where I couldn't really tell. Like, Japanese culture is so weird to Americans because of how I can't tell if the amount of deferential treatment of each other in this is satirical or not. I can't tell if the middle part is Japanese people actually acting as if they would normally act, or if this is like an office situation, where they're like sort of winking at the camera. I'm pretty sure it's satirical, but it's hard to tell where the jokes are sitting in a lot of ways. So I found it hard to get into, but I think the second act just drags because if the second act didn't have the third act rescuing it, I think it's a pretty bad movie at that point. Like, there's no point to the movie unless the third act does what it does in this. It's like, because the second act doesn't do anything to make the making of this movie a dramatically interesting thing at all. It sets up very boilerplate. Guy gets hired to make a pilot. He's tasked with doing a thing that he can't really do. Everyone's fighting. It's going to be difficult to do. Oh no, now it's time to do it. Let's see how it works out. But outside of that, there's nothing really interesting about the characters at all. The characters just kind of like props in this idea.
Well, I would say that the one thing that I think is very smart that they do is they put in one element of heart among all the gags, because I do think that the character of the director and his family is put together pretty well to really pay off that final scene when they all go into the pyramid at the end, because on top of everything else, you've got this guy who is a hack director who's basically doing this to try and prove that he's worth his job and prove that what he does is not just garbage. What's the line that he gives?
He does commercials or something.
What does he say? You'll get fast and cheap, but not good, or something like that. Or
no, fast, cheap, and average.
Fast, cheap, and average. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you've got that through line for the director, so you know how much pressure is on him, and it really allows you to get silly with everybody else, because at that point, the driving pressure is the director, and so the movie from in that second part is this guy herding cats,
Yeah.
Which I think I don't disagree. I think that the rest of it is gags, but I did like that bit, and the way that they pay it off at the end ultimately I thought was pretty good. It was just enough for me to make it not all just feel like one big gimmick.
Oh, yeah, I don't think the movie ever escaped a gimmick for me.
Yeah.
And like I think that's the reason I would never rewatch it, really, is because it doesn't have that. Once you're aware of the joke, I think this loses a lot of impact for a viewer. At least it would for me anyway, I think. I agree that I like the family thing works is mostly like, because it's kind of this meta commentary on like making of a movie is kind of like working with your difficult family to get everything done. Like the movie's sort of about that in a lot of ways too, about how different people with different opinions they don't necessarily get along with, how they all come together to make this product in the end. And I think that's fine. It's a little bit too. It did get me wondering just about like what I would need for a movie to sort of be something like impactful and memorable. I'm trying to think of like a gimmick movie that I've seen that I would say is fairly Memento maybe might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like Memento, there is a core to it where you get to the end and he does that final sort of monologue where he's like, you can be my John G or Jim G or whatever the hell that thing is. But it's like, that's been building off of this guy's been creating this whole false world around the death of his wife and like his pursuit of like justice that he'll never get. And so the gimmick doesn't overpower that central story. I think that One Cut of the Dead doesn't even really try to do anything that powerful or that interesting.
Yeah.
And I like that's where if it was shorter, I think I'd actually have a much higher rating of it. And I think it's actually kind of a cool gimmick movie. It's just something that struggles to be more than that. And you know, I also can't hold it against it because it is kind of just like a school project movie.
Right,
so it's like I shouldn't be expecting Scorsese or anything from it, and it's not that. But it's for how big it became. It's interesting that it doesn't have anything of those more like tropey trappings that you would expect, or like commonly accepted way that this is how you tell a movie and this is the story that's in that movie.
And I honestly, I think that the fact that it was so cheaply made and basically by students, I think that does bring it up quite a bit as far as the rating goes. Because I mean, when you know that going in, this movie is remarkable. Like you don't generally get something this well conceived and executed working outside of the usual like narrative format from like a class project, you know. And even for $25,000, it looks pretty good.
Looks pretty good,
you know. And I think part of that is because the look they're going for is cheap, and so your production value looks great because you are in fact cheap. And they've got like cameras that are good enough so it doesn't look terrible. You know, they look professional cameras. When that's the stuff that kills me nowadays.
Filmed on an iPhone 12.
Oh, you know, I'm of two minds, right? Like I think if you film it on something that is shitty on purpose and like you can get a good stylistic thing out of that, I'm all for it. Go for it. Go with God. But it's that middle ground where people are trying to look like professional, slick movies, but they're shot on shitty cameras that are and like don't have the talent of post-production necessary to make it look good. That stuff looks like I would watch the worst movie shot on film from 70 years ago. I'd rather watch that than watch one of these disgusting, shitty digital movies that look like they were, you know, mastered on a Mac from 2001.
Yeah, it's the technology goes in different ways, I guess. Like, because there are YouTube channels that I always think look really great, and then the person will be like, "I shot this on my iPhone."
Right?
It's like, wow, it looks like spectacular for that. Yeah. It obviously doesn't. The film look doesn't translate across the board, I don't think. And I also think it's one of those things where like the Adobe suite is so good now that your post-production can look better than the movie itself in some ways, because there's so many, it's so easy to use at this point. But
I watched a movie recently. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to go, I had a point about the second act, but if you have another point about the look of something.
Get into that in a second. I watched a movie recently that was a new movie made by a director who has made real movies and had real actors in it and stuff, but it looked like garbage. Like, I could not get over how bad this movie looked. And I know it was a lower budget movie, but like when you know that the people making it have made good looking movies, and then you see this and you're like, what actually happened here? It feels like something went wrong.
There was no reason to be shot cheaply. Like, there was no justification.
No, it was just like, I don't know if they shot it in the back end of Bucharest or something, and they just didn't have the right crew or whatever. But it was
all lighting.
Yeah, it's very frustrating when you see that stuff, because it's so unpleasant to me.
I feel we're kind of out of that bad digital era though. Like the digital cameras nowadays are pretty much film-like in how in the detail that they can pull and stuff. Like the early 2000s when they were shooting on like that digital cassette for a little while, which was, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's why I always appreciated like your 28 Days Later or your Collateral or something, where it's like, all right, we're going to push the limits of this technology for the stylistic purpose. It's when you try to emulate film badly with digital is when it looks really
digital
bad.
Grain. We'll add the grain in post.
Yeah.
See, I thought that the second act of this one felt the most like a student film in some, because just from its look, like it almost has the look that like the BBC and American Office have, which is that it's intentionally looking like it's kind of a documentary that they're filming,
right?
And that's not the concept, right? Like the concept is that it's not a documentary filming them. They're acting reality in the second act. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So it looks a little bit strange, and it's shot very uninterestingly. Obviously, they just had that like office room for the day or whatever, and they used that. But it wasn't. That was because I thought that the first act obviously has a stylistic look that it can do, the handheld camera thing. And then the third act I thought looked better because it melded the two styles effectively with each other, or it at least like the camera work in the third act was interesting because it had to be to make all the jokes work in a way that the second act wasn't.
Yeah, and I think what makes the second act work, because I don't disagree with you, right? I think if I were to watch this again, I would watch the first act, and then I would probably, I don't know, do my taxes or something while the second act was on.
Yeah.
And then I would focus back up to watch the third act. But I think on first viewing, when you get into the second act, you are so discombobulated and trying to figure out what's going on that makes the middle part compelling. Oh,
yeah. I guess I found the opposite reaction.
Okay.
I was frustrated because I was like, how are they going to discombobulate me in the middle of this movie now? Like, so I was struggling to be like, what is the movie going to be about at this point? Like, what am I supposed to care about? And I think that my problem trying to find the meaning in the second act is that you have to wait another half hour for the meaning of the movie to come out in the third act.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something to be said for just kind of letting the movie take you, though, right? Like, I don't know if you need to necessarily parse it out before it gets there.
Well, I think you do, because the second act here is, to me, functionally meaningless. Like, it's not. If I would have, I don't even know if there's a way that you can sort of hint at what is coming to sort of like establish. And again, it might come down to the kind of the tone thing. Like, they're playing it semi-seriously in the second act, where I'm like, is this now a drama that I need to pay attention to?
Sure.
Or is it not a drama? And I think that some of the characters are broad enough where you realize that it's supposed to be a comedy or something is supposed to be kind of strange. But it's not, I feel like it's just too late, and maybe I wasn't in the mindset of, after the first half hour, I wasn't in the mindset to recalibrate at that point. I was kind of like, can you please tell me what this movie is about? And it didn't do it for a very long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can see that. I think talking about the first act a bit,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting way to start a movie because you're going into this and this looks bad. Like it looks,
Yes,
if you're going into this thinking you're watching a Japanese zombie movie, I can see why you would be soured on that. And I actually read one IMDb review that was basically like, I'm a big fan of zombie horror movies. I've seen everything. I love zombie horror movies. I was excited for this Japanese one. I don't know what this was, man. This wasn't horror. This wasn't scary. It's like, oh, yes, you're correct. It wasn't those things. But it's not. That's not the movie, unfortunately.
No.
But that first sequence becomes in retrospect so brilliant because I was the whole last act. I was thinking back to the first act, going like, man, they really needed to plot out exactly what they were going to do in the third act, so they could pull it off in the first act. Like all the beats where they're holding on something for a while, or you've got the people who are later on you realize have frozen because there's someone with a cue card telling them what to do, and like just this weird awkwardness that the first time through just seems like an awkward low budget movie. On the back end, you realize, man, that's really difficult to coordinate all that stuff at the front to make it pay off at the end.
Yeah, I would assume, and I don't know, I don't think it knocks it down a notch or anything, but it's clearly a case of it's written backwards. Like they come up with the full movie third act and then they write the scene before it to make sense of that third act. And I like the first act, just because, again, I like the one cut or the one shot idea. That's kind of clever to me.
Which they did in one actual shot. It took them 6 tries and 2 days.
Which I was being from was it like True Detective season 1 had that famous sequence that was supposed to be one take, but it's clearly edited at certain points. But apparently here they did it. They got it done, which is impressive in and of itself. But it's did you notice the weirdness in the first act and think, did you connect the dots as to what was going on by watching the first act while you were watching it?
No, because at that point I didn't know what the movie was. Right.
I think the movie's masterstroke, I think, is that it disguises the weirdness well enough it hides the funkiness of what's actually going on in the third act within horror tropes effectively.
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah. Like
my favorite's the door, actually. Like the door, I thought the door was really clever where they're all sitting there in the first act and then they're talking about monsters or something and the door bangs and they all kind of look at it and go like, what was that?
Yep.
And you learned in the third act that the director is fighting with an actor and they just kind of bang into the door at that point. And it's just this nice little, it works perfectly within the context of the movie, but in retrospect, it makes the actors' reactions, you realize that they're surprised by what's going on when you rewatch the first part. So it's clever.
Yeah. And I think you get little satirical elements in there too, where they do things in that first sequence that would seem like they are artistic choices.
Yes.
Like the one
long scream takes.
Or when the camera falls on the ground and it just keeps watching the zombie chasing the girl, from that ground angle until someone picks the camera up. It's like, oh, that's a really interesting arty choice, and you realize that the guy just like had a hamstring pull or something.
I didn't know what happened.
He threw his back out, I think is what it was.
Oh, he threw his back out. Okay. I had no idea what had happened to him. He was just laying there. But yeah, he dropped the camera, and the new camera woman takes the place of it.
There was one that I thought might have been an actual accident that they kept in, because at the end of the credits or during the credits, they actually show you the behind the scenes of the shooting of the one long take. And there's
like the real behind the scenes.
Yes. And there's a bit in there where in the body of the movie, the camera person falls down.
Yeah.
and has to be helped up. And then in the
Yep.
behind the scenes part, you see the actual camera person slip and fall. So I was
Okay.
wondering if maybe that was something that they actually happened and they just kept it in and then worked in an excuse for it later on. Like I would love to know exactly where the line falls as far as what they wrote beforehand and what was a couple things maybe that happened during the actual shooting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's. I imagine you'd have to be fairly tight about that stuff. I mean, you've kind of tangentially reminded me that I guess I kind of wonder about the one take aspect only because there's one after the camera. Maybe it's not before the fall, but it's reminding me. There's a point where they're running and there's been blood splatter on the lens and the camera person wipes the lens off.
Yeah.
And I guess it's all digital there, done that way
No.
to get around the one.
It's not.
No?
No, it's apparently real, yeah.
How can they clean the lens so
I don't know.
effectively?
I don't know. They got lucky, I guess, because that fake blood streaks like a bitch.
Yeah, because I thought I had talked myself into, clearly it was just a digital process that they did afterwards to avoid that. But
No, apparently it was all in camera, yeah.
Huh. Interesting. But outside of that, I think that a lot of the clever moments of like, I think you start to see the strings a little bit later on as it moves on, because I think that the movie is set up where they wrote the third act and they realized that you kind of have to keep pushing the ball a little bit
Right,
in terms of like a narrative thing. So like bigger stunts, like the director like knocking out his wife and then she wakes up in the middle of it and things like that. Like you start to see the sort of excessive stuff that they have to do later on. But I think that it all works in terms of like the confusion of the first place. In the first act, the first part that I started to notice and wonder if I was understanding what was happening was the repeating of the dialogue of the stop, stay away from me thing at the rooftop at the end of the first
Oh,
act.
sure, yeah.
Because it's a repetition of what they did very early in that, but it's also, it goes on more times than makes sense in the movie,
Right.
in reality to happen, if you want to use reality in quotes or whatever.
Yeah, I think what they do really well is for me anyway, I found myself, they throw in these little bits of weirdness like that make you start going, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? Like it's not enough that they really tip their hand the whole way, but like even as the movie starts, I'm trying to figure out like, all right, is this supposed to be a found footage thing? But I don't think so because nobody's addressing the camera. But
Yeah,
then
I
there's
thought
that one point where
yeah.
the director grabs the camera and says like, keep shooting or something like that. And it's like, oh wait, is this a found footage? Or did he just break the fourth wall? Like what?
Yeah.
Like, they start throwing these little bits in there that makes you kind of unsure about what you're actually watching.
The most confusing thing to me was that no one talked to the cameraman in the movie, which is very unusual in a found footage thing, I think. Like no one...
Right.
I don't think they ever say that person's name in the movie, which is good. Someone's always running something like, come on, Bob, or whatever, and Bob's like carrying the camera around and running around with it.
Right.
But they don't do that in this movie for whatever reason. But that is... it's impressive camera work for the first act from those kids.
Yeah. It's... I really liked the stuff with the payoff of the palm thing. I just thought was friggin' when you again, as you're saying, they're setting all this stuff up in the second act, but like when you find out that what she was improvising that based off the tape she was watching.
Yeah, and that's the so I mean, I wasn't sure I completely understood in the first act. Mm-hmm. When they discuss the palm thing, right? They say, do you have any weird hobbies or something like that? Is that them improvising to kill time?
Yes.
At that point? Okay. Yeah. I wasn't clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think one of the more impressive bits of writing and construction is there's a moment that doesn't, when you're watching the first third, doesn't really feel like that big of a complicated thing. But then when you see it at the end, it seems needlessly complicated, and that's the girl getting the axe inside that, like, the shed or whatever.
Yeah, running to the shed.
Yeah, because they're rewriting on the fly as they're shooting it. And so they realize that she needs to get an axe, but they're up on the roof. And so they have to send somebody down to plant an axe for this girl to grab. And it's one of the funnier reveals of what the shot is, for me anyway, because in the first third, you see she's crouching on the ground, and then you see like what can only be described as zombie knees.
Yeah, zombie legs.
Kind of like shuffle into the shot, stand there for a second, and then leave. And then at the back end, it's revealed that it's a person who had his knees made up to look like a zombie so he could walk in and hold a cue card that says you need to grab an axe when you leave.
Yeah, because it is one of those examples of like it makes sense in the context of the movie, but when I was watching the opening act, and it's not like this is a failure, I was just very confused about what that scene was saying to me in terms of the movie.
Same. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, this feels weird enough for me to go like, I'm not really sure what is going on.
Can the zombie
here.
see her? Like, why can't the zombie see her? That kind of thing. Yeah.
The one thing that I straight up did not like in this movie was the music. I thought the music was really tacky and like felt like a bad sitcom or something. I can't really
just the sort of like, even during all parts of it, or just
just the general music they had running over through the whole thing felt like
royalty free
stuff. You could which maybe that's what it was, and if that's what it was, they get $25,000. They're working with what they can get, but
you search for the first thing that can pop up on YouTube or whatever, and throw that onto your cut of the movie.
Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, or should we get into the real question which is does this belong on the list? Is this a horror movie?
I think I just, do I have anything to like, did you like the first half hour movie in and of itself?
I think I was at a bit of an advantage because I was watching this through the Last Drive-In episode. And so his whole preamble is basically like, this is not the movie you think it's going to be. So he's not telling you what's going on. He's not giving it away, but he's priming you to
setting the table for you.
So like as it's happening, I'm watching it and going like, all right, this is not a particularly good zombie movie.
Yeah.
But clearly there's a twist coming. So but if I took it on its own, I think the fact that it's one shot is more impressive than anything else that they do in it.
Yeah, that's what carries it. What did you think of the zombie portrayal in this movie?
Not a huge fan.
Yeah.
It was pretty goofy.
I like the kid who loses his arm.
He was good.
Was okay. Yeah.
Well, the one guy who's drunk, apparently, at least according to IMDb trivia, was actually drunk when they shot it.
Oh, okay.
He decided to go method in that way, which seems like a bad idea. But he was really all over the place.
It's a good movie for the importance of your cameraman, where a kid acting like a zombie looks fucking stupid when it's just shot cinematically, but if you add a little bit of camera jiggle and like the camera's shaking around, it looks like it's this terrifying thing that's happening.
Of course,
but if it's just a guy sort of going like rah and walking around, it looks totally absurd. I thought you guys must have talked about it, but I don't actually know your opinion. Do you like found footage stuff? Which is, I'm going to call this a found footage movie because that would be the way that it must be. It would have to be because someone has to find the tape at the end of the day.
I don't know if I would call it it's
just the first act movie.
Oh, just the first act.
Just the first act.
Yeah. Yes, I guess it would be a found footage movie. Again, they don't ever actively address the camera person, so it's tough to say.
And it's hard to say if like who would find the tape. Basically, like
right.
there's no. Usually in a found footage, there's a preamble where the text pops up and says this thing was found in Antarctica 15 years ago or something.
Yeah. I fell for that so hard on the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the hell was going. There was the Sci-Fi Channel had a whole special about it, about this footage they found of these people that died. I was in the bag so hard for that, but by the time I saw the movie, it was already all
It was spoiled for you.
Yeah, so that movie didn't really work very well for me. But
yeah, I liked the first act movie enough.
Yeah.
I think it was. And I think you kind of have to like it a little bit, right? Like I think a lot of the movie's success relies on that first act holding your attention enough to get you into the movie, and then have enough meat on the bone for the third act to actually mean something too. So I think it does an effective job of that. It's certainly not, if the entire movie was just the first act, it becomes a horror movie, but it doesn't make it a better movie at all. It's a worse movie if that's the entire premise.
Well, it becomes the movie you expect it to be, right? Because when you hear, student film, 25,000, it's pretty innovative, and then you see the first 35 minutes, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, clearly this looks like a student production. I guess it's innovative because they did it all in one shot.
Yep.
And I think that's the biggest, ace that the whole movie as a whole has, is that it kind of lulls you in with that and then hits you with the rest of it.
Yeah. Did you? And we haven't really talked about it. What'd you think of the actors and the everyone, from that like creepy old lady who's trying to either buy the pilot or whatever?
She was weird.
She's an example of I might have been lost in translation with her.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what's tough with these movies. The Japanese and Korean movies that go for the satire or comedy style. Yeah, it's really tough to tell
where the joke is.
Yeah, where the joke is and where the dial is on the ridiculousness scale.
Yep.
Yep. Because it was very strange, though.
I had a thing in the opening movie. They keep saying director. They keep calling the director just director. Yeah. Right. And I was like, is this a Japanese thing?
Right. Yeah.
Or are they meta commentarying by sort of treating the director as God in this movie at this point, where he like doesn't have a name? He's just kind of this ephemeral director thing that's controlling everything. And I guess it's just supposed to be a Japanese cultural artifact, because it doesn't really amount to, I guess you could go either way on it, but they don't play that angle up where it's like not the case that's just a Japanese way that they talk about each other.
I actually thought for a minute it might have been just bad translation.
Oh, interesting.
Because there was a couple other lines that felt weird, where at one point
I think the subtitles are wrong in a few things.
That's what I meant. Yeah, like because there was one where he says, "Fun fucking tastic."
Yes.
I was like, that's not something people say. Is that just a spelling error? But then he says it again later. Like in the third act, he says the same thing. Like, all right, I don't know. Maybe that's what he said. Who knows?
Well, this is I feel there's an obvious answer, but this is always a discussion that goes on with the localization of like video games and anime and stuff like that. Are you of the opinion that a localization should exactly say, like literally translate what the words are in Japanese into English, or should you adjust it to make English context more important? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
There are some diehards in the video game field that feel it's like sacrilege to not literally translate the words.
Sure. I would say interpreting the intent works better for me than literalization.
Yeah.
Because you still want it to sound like a person saying it,
Yeah, no, I think you have to localize for the audience. Like it doesn't really, getting the words exactly right is less important than putting it in a metaphor that English speaking people understand. You know what I mean? Like you can't stick with Japanese metaphors and things like that.
Well, I think it all depends on. It depends on what it is, right? Because like I that's why I don't think you can. I think doing a translation for something like that needs a person to do it, as opposed to like a computer or an AI or something. Because I think there is, they call them interpreters for a reason. Like you have to kind of interpret and remold what you're hearing. And I think a really good example of that is when you watch a movie with subtitles versus if you watch it dubbed. And the dubbing may seem more normal, but they're just trying to match it to the mouth movements more than what's actually being said. Yep. And so, like, I remember years ago I was watching the movie Django, not the Quentin Tarantino one, the original one, the Italian Western. And there's this big shootout or whatever at the final scene, and we were watching it with the dubbing on. And he has his big final line before he shoots the guy. And it was something like, now you're going to get what's yours. And like something like fast and like lame like that. And then we were both kind of like, oh, that's kind of lame. And then I went back and I watched that scene with the subtitles on, and it was like the actual line was like this profound burn that he threw at this guy that was 100 times better. And I was like, yeah, okay, maybe next time we watch this with the subtitles.
Yeah. They can fit more text in Japanese subtitles than they can in English too. You know, it's that whole thing. So you run out of space. I guess there's an art to being able to see how many words. But I did notice that I feel like I can't remember specific examples, but I feel like words were missing in the subtitles. Something like it was not phonetically correct or grammatically
that's possible.
Correct. Yeah.
Hey, they only had $25,000.
Yeah.
To answer your question about found footage, I can go either way with it. Like, I think it can be very effective, but I think it can also be very hacky.
What's the best found footage movie?
The best found footage movie. I have always been a big fan of Cloverfield.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think Cloverfield is really clever in how it chooses to open up the world in very terrifying ways. And that's another one where it's kind of like sort of meant to feel like a single shot, but they're breaking it up with, the digitization kind of breaking it up. Yeah,
anytime an explosion or a fast turn happens, you just
do you have a favorite single shot movie? And also, when do you find that to be worth doing versus just a big gimmick?
I actually feel there must be others. What are some famous examples of one-shot movies that are out there now?
Most recent two I can think of were 1917 was a big single-shot movie.
Okay.
And The Revenant, that was a big single-shot movie.
Yeah.
There is a Russian movie, which I think is called The Russian Ark. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Which is completely realistically a 90-minute one-shot film.
Okay.
Which I've never seen because it sounds kind of like a chore to watch.
Yeah, I don't know why I like the concept so much, but I kind of do. But it's something that it's super limited in what it allows. Like I think the reason you probably like Cloverfield is that Cloverfield is a setup that allows for a continual excitement level that you have to maintain in that kind of a movie.
Which is what they're kind of doing here in that first 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it's why the second act doesn't work for me as much, is because it's like it loses that kind of forward momentum. But Cloverfield's a good example. I liked you guys it's found footage. I don't know if you consider a single take, but what's the one that Quarantine was remade?
Wreck.
Yeah. Wreck was great. I liked Wreck. I think that was a pretty good found footage one. But no, I don't know why I have a soft spot for it, because I don't think there's ever been a super great movie that I really enjoy that does it. I just find it kind of a novel, cutesy thing to do. And it's maybe more impactful when there are scenes within larger movies that are just extended long takes like that, you know?
Because, I think that is generally the one take thing is to keep the tension and excitement level high. Like I think that's one of the reasons why it works in 1917 is because that story is about a guy trying to make it from point A to point B, but to get to point B, he has to make it through the entire First World War. Right. And so it's just constantly the insanity of the war. And, that I think is really a really good use for that. Whereas The Revenant, I thought The Revenant was pretty gimmicky to me. Like when a third of that movie is Leonardo DiCaprio rolling around on the ground just screaming, it's like, do we really need to do this in one shot?
You got to capture the emotion. See, that's I think it might be a holdover for me because as I think I'm getting older, the one cut or the one shot thing is a kind of technical accomplishment that removes you a little bit from being invested in the movie because you're observing it as like a technical feat or a technical accomplishment, and I that can be nice, but I think I'm more at a point where that stuff is less interesting to me than the impact of how I feel about the movie, really.
Sure.
So maybe it's a little bit of a distraction in some cases, or maybe it's just a holdover of what I used to like a little bit more than what I do now. But I don't mind it. And obviously, I think it's one of those examples of when you don't notice it, it's done well. It's that kind of, it's like CGI,
right,
sort of.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, those are the ones that they stand out because if you're watching it with somebody, one of you inevitably goes, I think this is all one shot.
Yeah.
I was watching something recently. I can't remember what the hell it was, but like there was a sequence like that where about halfway through it, I turned to my girlfriend, I was like, I think this has all been one shot.
Has there been a cut? Right. Yeah.
We recently watched Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, which is shot to be a one long single shot. And but it does that thing where like, you know, to disguise the cuts, they like push into somebody's back.
Yeah, or a vase falls in the way or something like that. Yeah.
I always assumed that was just a cheat, but I was watching the making of and stuff, and the only reason they were doing that is because the film ran out. Like the film canisters only had so much film, and so they they have to cut
to
reload the film, and that's a really interesting one as far as the one shot thing goes, because instead of it being
Rope is a dinner party, isn't it?
Yeah,
isn't that the
it's
setup
great.
For it? Yeah.
I really liked it.
Yeah.
What's really cool about the use there is it allows the movie to work more like a play, because everybody's playing the scene live essentially, the way that you would see it in live theater, and so it gives a little bit of a different kind of edge to the way things go. Instead of relying on cuts, you're relying more on camera movements and what the actors are doing. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it ties into this, right, where this guy plagiarized the play.
Right. Yes.
And I wonder what that play is like.
I know. I was trying to think of this. Like, how could you possibly... What did they take?
How does that work? Yeah.
Did they take the part about the guy shitting in the bushes? Is that in the play?
My finest work, stolen by Shinichi Ueda. Yeah.
Creator of the palm slide technique.
That was the... just before we go to the final thoughts, I actually liked the diarrhea guy because that was a weird in the first act. That's a weird horror thing of the guy just starts acting strangely, and then when you understand what's happening in the third act, you're like, oh, it's kind of funny that he's just trying to get out of there, and they don't want him to leave because it's going to ruin the sequence.
Yeah, and I repurposing him screaming because he's going to shit his pants as him getting attached by something. Very good.
The diarrhea joke itself was, I was wondering if that was a bridge too far. That feels very there felt like there was something excessively slapsticky or something.
Yeah,
about
that's I feel like that's the style though. In the Japanese comedy style is they tend to push it.
Yeah, they love that. They love that.
But I felt the same way at the first bit. Where he he's like farting and stuff, and he's like, it's starting to come out. I was like, all right, fine. But when they cut to him in the bushes, and the woman's putting the makeup on him while he's like sobbing and shitting, like, okay, that's excellent. That's very good.
I did like that guy's his running joke of he's like, I sent an email. I thought it was kind of funny as a funny little verbal joke, but it brings up this whole I just like culturally I find the interaction of Japanese people just like I don't know where the reality sits in it.
Sure.
You know, they're so deferential to each other that it's hard to understand where the satire comes in. And honestly, like I feel uncomfortable for Japanese women, I think, in a lot of this stuff. It's they're very submissive, and like when that guy is talking to her about the email, she She seems like she's at like a nightclub and the drunk guy is hitting on her. She just can't get away from him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they don't actually bow. That's all just made up because they think we think it happens, so they just perpetuate that.
Oh, how they think we're all plumbers over here too?
No, I'm making that up. I have no idea.
They bow with jiu-jitsu, so I assume that is exactly what happens in Japan all the time.
My girlfriend had a friend come visit her from Scotland when she was in New York, and when she got there, my girlfriend was like, "Okay, you're in America. What's the first thing you want to see?" And she said, "A Native American."
Yeah.
She was like,
Get a shovel.
Yeah.
Get a shovel, baby.
We might need to take a trip out west.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Do we have any reservations around here? We don't, right? They're all out west.
No. I think they're all out west. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Have you ever been to one?
No.
No, me neither.
No. I don't think they don't seem to be particularly happy places at this point in time, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I would like to go visit Monument Valley.
Yep.
And apparently that is, I don't know if the entire thing is Native American land, but I believe.
Well, we've been to Foxwoods. That's Native American.
That's the same thing. Yeah.
It's the same. They just put capital into it and got capital out of it.
Yeah. But I guess you have to, in order to go down and tour Monument Valley, you have to go through a Native American association to do it.
Oh.
So I don't know. Maybe I'll be there one day. Who knows? So yeah, horror movie. Does it deserve to be on this list? What do you think?
It's not a horror movie.
No.
You guys, maybe, is American Psycho still the other one that's the most controversial about whether or not it's a horror movie?
Yes,
for you guys?
I think that is our other
standard bearer for this discussion.
I think so. I feel like we had one recently. Eraserhead? No.
Have you come down, or you or Amanda come down with your own definition of what a horror movie is to like line this up?
I honestly can't. I honestly can't remember. The last one, the episode we did before this, Night of the Hunter, that was one where it could go either way. That can't
be a horror movie, right? I guess it depends on.
Yeah, it really depends on your definition, because as Danny on the show was saying, it's like it's regarded as a film noir movie as well, but not. There's a lot of reasons why it is and a lot of reasons why it isn't. And I think that the same goes for Night of the Hunter being a horror movie. This one, I feel like you can pretty cleanly say this is not a horror movie.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, like, what's the closest analog to this? Something like Shaun of the Dead?
Which is also not a horror movie. I don't think, but is more of a horror movie than this is.
But I don't think that Shaun of the Dead doesn't deserve to be on the list because it does have zombies in it. Like it has the supernatural thing in it.
Yes.
Whereas this, it's just played for a joke and is not.
Yeah, I was trying to think of an example of what this would like. It would be. I don't really know. It's kind of unique in that way about like how it undercuts what its genre is by making it into something completely different. Because like I guess the closest analog would be Scary Movie or something, right? Which is not a horror movie because it does the same thing that this, obviously not as well, but it does the same sort of concept.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Is Scary Movie on your list?
I don't believe so. There are the new revamped list does have some straight up comedies on it.
Yeah.
I can't remember at the time because I don't know where they are on the list. But
yeah, because my definition, a horror movie to me, I still kind of stick with it has to have a supernatural aspect to it that makes it not. And I think the only exception to this rule, although I think you can still push it into it, is the Gorno genre, which I still call. It'd be like the Hostels of the world.
Oh, sure.
Which I still think because a lot of that still kind of acts in a Michael Myers way, where it's a guy that you just can't kill for some reason.
Right. Yeah.
So it still falls into that, but this doesn't have any supernatural element in it because it's all real life, and it therefore There's nothing scary in it also, which makes it not effectively a horror movie. But I can clearly say it's not a horror movie and does not belong on the list of 200 greatest horror movies. But it's a good movie.
It also has no violence in it or anything. Like it's just it has fake violence, obviously. But
yes, yeah,
it is. Yeah. I would say, it's a straight up comedy to me. I don't know if it deserves to be on the list. Even if it did,
certainly not 8.
Yeah, 8 is very high.
This is
it's good, but guys, come on.
It's a good example of the weakness of Rotten Tomato, right? Like I would call this a fresh movie, but it doesn't deserve 100% freshness. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a fine movie.
Again,
I enjoyed it.
I think this is going to sound so reductive, but it's like I think a big part of it is it's like if you were to put a really good movie made by your young son on this list. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Where it's like it has this element of the fact that it is a student-produced thing done so cheaply and makes it a remarkable feat. That's not to say it's not good. That's not to say this is like, the kindergarten drawing you're magneting to the fridge or something. But I do think that is a big part of the acclaim is that, you think what you're getting is the first 35 minutes, but then when you see the rest of it, you're going, oh shit, this is actually a very well-crafted movie. And so it's going to sit higher, I think, because of all that stuff.
That's why at the start I thought this was going to be a high critic, low audience kind of movie on Rotten Tomatoes, because I think that the critics, it's like you were saying, it sounds reductive, but this is the kind of movie that critics would like jerk themselves off to, I think,
Yes.
Where I think that the audience is much more prone to be very split about whether or not this is even what they wanted to rent from Blockbuster or whatever,
Oh, totally.
It's that kind of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I could see plenty of people getting 50 minutes into this and going like, what the fuck am I watching?
I got very close to, I was like, I don't want to watch this movie anymore because of that second act. But the third act is so good that it saves that concept for you. And I see the critical response in that of thinking that this is a very clever, interesting, well thought out, structured movie. But maybe not everything that the general audience would want to say.
Yeah, it's a really unique movie in that I feel like there are plenty of movies where you can get 50 minutes into it and go like, fuck this movie.
Yeah.
But this is one where it's, for whatever reason, it is done well enough that instead of just saying that, you're going, there has to be a reason they're doing this.
Yeah.
There has to be something else coming. This isn't just a boring office drama now, right? There's got to be something else,
What's the first?
And it's I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think the middle part, while the weakest part, is charming enough to at least bridge that gap.
What's the first sort of joke gimmick in the third act that makes you understand what's going on? Do you remember? Is there something before?
I think it's the drunk guy, because he misses his cue because he's passed out, and then they have to like puppet him. Because that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Because you see him, like, the director has his hand like up the guy's shirt, moving his head around.
And you realize why it was shot that way in the opening movie. It has this weird angle where you don't see their legs at all. It's like it's just very torso heavy.
And so I guess before that would be when they fall into the door. I guess that's the first one, the first big one.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So maybe that's why I like the door bit so much, because that's the first one that made me wonder. Okay, so I don't think we're missing anything before. But when the movie got to those moments, I was like, oh, it was all worth it. The first hour of this movie is all going to pay off now, and it did fairly well for the rest of the 25 minutes or whatever.
Right, and it's so funny too, because like that they get the shot. Like, that they get that final shot, but you're still like, fuck, how are they going to do this? The crane's broken. What the hell are they going to do?
I thought they could have done a better job. I don't know if I needed a line or something, but when the thing fell off the roof, I was like, what the fuck is that?
Yes. I also, yes. It took me a minute to realize what they were looking at.
Yeah. Just a little crane. Yeah.
But I think that's going to do it for One Cut of the Dead. Thank you for joining us, Wes. Thank you for filling in for that deadbeat world traveler, Amanda.
Yeah, sure, no worries. I'm glad it was not another Nightmare on Elm Street, quite frankly, because after we did that one, I didn't realize that Red Letter Media had did the exact same thing, and they watched all the Halloween and the Nightmare on Elm Street stuff, and it was just one of those things of like when someone else shares your opinion about something, you feel a little bit more validated because Mike from that channel does not like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and I was like, oh, I feel okay with not liking that.
I don't know if I made it. I know I watched at least. They did the Friday the 13th movies. I think I watched that one. I don't think I've watched the Nightmare one yet. I'll have to watch that. Yeah.
So it's this is definitely obviously much better than Nightmare on Elm Street, and I would give this one this is like a solid B, which I don't think is bad. I really enjoyed it, but again, like, would you ever watch this movie again?
Like I said, I think I would probably watch 2/3 of it again. I think I would probably zone out in the middle, and then come back for the end and watch I actually almost watched the beginning again because I wanted to see it again, knowing what was going on.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this is exactly what I would like go to annually or something.
Yeah, I think I'd have a tough time recommending it too. Yeah. Like it's a truly specific recommendation.
Yeah, you got to know your audience on this one. You got to, because if you're just having a casual chat with someone you don't know, maybe not the first one you go to.
You love Japanese horror comedies that are not really horrors? Well, I have the movie for you, my friend.
Yes. But yeah, Amanda will be back next episode, which is our 100th episode. And so what we're going to do for our 100th episode, we are going to be covering something. We're going to be covering, I'm going to say, we're going to be covering the scariest zombie movie I've ever watched. And if you are a longtime listener of the show, you should know what that is, because I've mentioned it a couple times. But
is it on the list?
It is not on the list.
Okay.
And I may also be not 100
wrong about that.
No, I'm not. It's definitely not on the list, but my description of it might be a little misleading. But it's okay. It's a little bit closer to if this
just in
was
calling it a zombie movie. You mean?
Calling it a movie.
Oh, okay. A movie.
I would say it's closer to the first third of this movie.
Okay.
But that's all I'll say, because you're not really going to miss much if you don't watch it before the episode. It's a short watch, let's put it that way. But we'll also be doing a Q&A, listener Q&A, so if you would like to send some questions in for us on our 100th episode, you can do that too. Is it the Pensky File video at gmail.com?
Yeah, the Pensky File video at Gmail.
PENSKY, right?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll put that in the, you could be in the link down below for the podcast and the YouTube video too.
Excellent. Thank you guys. And if you want to follow us on Patreon, head over to patreon.com/the Pensky File, where you can follow Amanda and I as we go through the Halloween film franchise. We will be doing Halloween 3 was
just out today, as the day of this recording.
March, yes. And of course, Halloween 4 will be in April. We have Amanda's. We recorded the first 3 with before Amanda left, so there has been a dramatically accurate amount of time between us watching Halloween 3 and Halloween 4. So we'll see how that translates. But
it'll be a refreshing break for you to come back and to reinvigorate yourself in the midst of Halloween.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for supporting the show, and we will see you next time.